Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the latest episode of the Wake Up Podcast. And I have finally managed to wrangle the one and only Michael Saylor to come join me for what I think is going to be a deep and multifaceted conversation. So, Mike, thank you for taking the time to come and jump on, man. You're very generous with your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Alex.
Absolutely, man. Look, there's a bunch of places where I want to open this up and so many threads we can pull on. But I wanted to just start off with some basics and just reiterate for everyone why we're here, why Bitcoin is important, what money is, and then we can kind of explore. I don't want to spend too much time on the noise and what's happening in the world today because Bitcoin's up, down, and around in circles, and who really gives a shit? Like, your time frame really matters here. But I'd love to start with uh, how you've in the past separated money and currency, and because I think people conflate those two all the time, and I'd like to discuss what is different about the two.
Yeah, well, I think oftentimes we use concepts like money in a very sloppy fashion, and people use money uh, and currency as though they're synonymous.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't really think there's been a lot of deep thinking about this. I mean, I could honestly say before Bitcoin, I didn't really think that deeply about it. I
Mm-hmm.
was I was prompted to think deeply about it when Robert Breedlove invited me onto his show, What is Money?
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, wow, we're going to talk about what is money. So I guess I better figure it out. And so then I started to think. And now I think it's helpful if you adopt these kind of definitions, noting that we're so early in this journey that 95% of the world hasn't thought deeply about it, and
Mm-hmm.
probably they would probably use these words or terms differently, and many people, even economists and business people, don't really know what money is, or they just define it sloppily in the context. So here's what I think are the useful definitions, and then we can have a discussion. I think money is economic energy.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a certain amount of economic energy, let's say you have $100,000 of economic energy in the year 2022, that can be exchanged for products or services or property. Right? I can fly somewhere. I can buy something. I can, you know, throw a party in the year 2022. Clearly, $100,000 worth of money in 2022 doesn't buy you the same goods, services, or products in the year 1900. It would buy you a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
And in the year 2200, won't buy you the same thing either. So, so you have a certain amount of money at a certain time that you can measure in a currency. The currency, in this case, the US dollar, is the medium of exchange in that political frame of reference at the time you have the money. So if money is economic energy, what happens is you change political frames of reference. $100,000 buys you a certain amount in the US. And if you go to Japan, well, it doesn't buy you anything because they don't accept dollars for
Mm-hmm.
restaurants. You can't buy a house in dollars. You have to convert it to yen. So you would convert that amount of money from the dollar currency into the yen currency. If you trip through 180 countries, you would have to convert it generally into the currency that's the medium of exchange and the legal tender in the country. Since most countries have a different legal currency. Some countries, like in Europe, share a similar one, the euro. So money is economic energy. The currency is the medium of exchange, or it is an asset legally designated by a nation state as an acceptable medium of exchange, and it's given a legal advantage, a political advantage, because you can transfer it tax free. So if I have $100,000 and I want uh, to buy an expensive car with it, right? I can exchange the 100,000 of money via the currency into the car without paying a capital gains tax, and without incurring a capital gain loss on the transaction. Um, if I had a bunch of Apple stock, $100,000 worth of Apple stock, I would have an asset. Actually, you could, in fact, a batch of securities worth $100,000. But if I bought the car with $100,000 of Apple stock, and I had acquired the Apple stock for $50,000, I would actually get the car and I get a tax bill for the capital gains on $50,000, right? That's what the nation state says. So for that reason, Apple stock or a bunch of securities don't make good medium of exchange,
Mm-hmm.
right? Even if it was liquid, right? It's not a good medium of exchange because my credit card, doesn't work so well with Apple stock, and because I can't transfer Apple stock on a Saturday afternoon. And those are reasons why I wouldn't use it in order to buy a car. But the most important reason that securities will never be currency is because it's deemed as, we'll call it property by the IRS, and subject to a capital gains tax. So the currency in the modern world is whatever the government says it is. If you're in a state of anarchy, right, or chaos. Let's say you're in a war zone. You're in Afghanistan after the government fell, right? While the Americans were pulling out, all the banks failed, right? Clearly, it's not. There's no effective government to designate a local Afghan fiat currency. There's no government to impose taxes, right? That's anarchy. In that particular case, if you happen to be an Afghan citizen and you're doing a trade with another Afghan citizen, you want to buy whatever they've got, their car, right, their food, you could use Bitcoin as a currency, and it would be a currency because there's no government to tell you that you can't use it as a currency.
In that case, you could use goats, right? You could use basically anything.
Yeah, you could use gold, you could use bullets,
I was saying
you
goats
could.
because that's
Yeah,
more
I got it.
likely. Yeah.
You could barter whatever you wanted,
Yeah.
right? But the reason that anything is currency is because there's not an effective nation state. So the reason that we end up with a dichotomy, right? What money is economic energy. There's one aspect of money we'll call property, another aspect of money we'll call currency,
Mm-hmm.
um, and both of those sum up into money. The property would be a long duration asset. If I want to own a house, if I have a house, a car, a Bitcoin, a bar of gold, even a share of stock, I suppose, or a corporation, we could all think of them as property forms of money, right? They all have economic value, but generally they all have a tax treatment. Not always the same, but oftentimes there's a taxable event when you transfer property from one person to another person. Right? Like for example, if I traded you my house for a car, and if there's a tax on disposition of real estate, oftentimes there's a real estate tax on transfer of title, right? Not only are you going to get the capital gains tax, you're also going to get the real estate tax. So that's even worse than transferring, say, the Apple shares, because you get hit twice,
Twice. Yeah.
right? Sometimes you could get all sorts of random taxes depending upon the legal definition of the property. So the the best way to think of it is if there is an effective nation state, it can choose to designate one or more assets as currency. Generally, one asset: the euro, the yen, the won, the CNY, the USD, right? Those would be designated as currencies or legal tender. You transfer them tax free. Um, the there's two reasons why um, you've got an advantage of your designated currency. The one obvious reason is because I can transfer the asset to someone else in a trade tax free. Okay, that's the obvious reason, right? Because if I move the money 10 times in a year, and if there happens to be a 10% tax each time I move it, there's no money left at the end of the year, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're trading a property high velocity over the course of a few years, the property disappears. In a decade, the property certainly disappears.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, like if you're designated a property, if I had $100,000 of property in Florida, I wouldn't even have to trade it. Just holding it subjects it to a 2% a year fee, so that over the course of 50 years, the property goes away, right? So that's a nation state basically taking your property away, but it's worse than that, right? Because they could reassess the property every year. And if they reassess the property up 7% a year, you don't even get it for 50 years. You get it for about 25 years before the property goes away. So when you look at your assets, um, the nation has the ability to classify them however they want, and the best classification is currency, because I could hold the currency from a tax point of view. That is, I can hold the currency for 100 years, and I'm not getting a 2% property tax a year, and I'm not getting the capital gains when I transfer it. So that's why currency tends to separate from property as monetary assets. And when you think about think about the world, right? 8 billion people in the world. If you want liquid assets, you'd like a liquid property asset like Bitcoin that you can hold for 100 years. It's a store of value. And then if you want to move through nation states, if you want to do business in, rent a house or buy something in the UK or in Europe or in the US, you're going to have a currency asset. And you can decide how much of your wealth you want to store in the currency, right? If you store 100% of your wealth in the currency, then the pro is your taxable situation is simple. The con is, of course, you're getting diluted very rapidly.
Yeah, the hidden
But there's
tax.
But there's one more point I was going to make. So the first benefit of an asset being designated currency is the fact that you can transfer it without tax or hold it without taxable consequences. But the secondary benefit, which is its kind of derivative benefit, is the accounting for the transactions becomes orders of magnitude easier.
Mm.
So the world is run by 100 million companies. And those 100 million companies, they provide your pizza and they wash your clothes and they operate the airplanes and they operate the ships and they operate the railroads and they give you your job, right? And they're Apple and Google and Amazon and they have the electricity and they pump the water. We can't really reasonably do without the companies. The companies all have accounting systems. The big accounting companies are SAP and Oracle and Microsoft. They are wired into those 100 million companies. They are the nervous system of the companies. And the companies can't legally do business. They can't comply with local law without the accounting systems. So the companies become non-compliant when they don't have the right accounting systems. To operate, especially as a public company, but even as a private company, you end up making really, really large investments in accounting systems. You're talking about hundreds of finance professionals in most mid-sized companies, and 10, 20, 30, $50 million in the accounting systems. And those things, it would be if you wanted to rip it out or change it and do it fast would be in a decade, and likely would be 15 to 20 years. And so generally the average life span of that customer relationship with those accounting firms is 25, 30 years. So it's a very, very long duration investment. So if you want to introduce a new currency, you can't do it without the support of the nation state. And then, and if you go against that nation state guidance, right, the companies will just immediately reject it because they would be deemed non-compliant and they would lose their license to do business in the country. And it would be worse than that, right? Like the CEO is going to jail and the CFO is going to jail if they're not compliant. So they're not going to do it. They will reject any kind of currency that doesn't meet nation state acceptance. But even if they wanted to wire their systems, like let's say they were going to accept it, they end up having to modify all their accounting systems to immediately translate the property into the currency. And now you're talking about generating hundreds of thousands or millions and millions of taxable events every month, every week. So imagine if I did 87 million transactions selling 87 million pizzas, but I was doing it in a non-currency like a Bitcoin. You would literally have to keep track of the price of Bitcoin 87 million times, and you'd have to have a different price for every transaction in the system. And then you would have to calculate when you paid your bills, every single bill would be a different mixture of Bitcoin going out the other side. And so you're talking about accounting systems that become orders of magnitude more complicated, and nobody would willingly take on that headache. I mean, if you went to SAP and Oracle and said, "Build this for us," they would laugh at you. And
Mm.
they're kind of a duopoly. Like there's only three companies in the world that do this, so they don't have to do anything. So the currency is a very, very deep-seated, strong network effect, and this accrues. It accrues to the United States because if you have the world's reserve currency, then your reserve currency is built into the accounting systems and into the exchanges and the marketplaces of every country on Earth, and it's built into all of the property assets, right? Because the currency is built into the bonds, it's built into commercial real estate leases. They're 30-year leases, right, that are indexed to the United States CPI. And so if you were to calculate the total amount of investment in all of these things, you realize it's extraordinary. So ultimately, money money is energy. You have a lot of flexibility about how you store your economic energy, and you have to decide what your goal is. Do you want to hold it for 1,000 years? Do you want it to be portable? Do you want it to be programmable? Do you want it to be high frequency? Do you want high velocity money? Do you want to move it every day, every week, every month? And if and so depending upon what your use is of the money, you would probably and also your political nexus and your geographic nexus. For example, it's a different circumstance for an American citizen in Argentina than it is for an Argentine citizen in Argentina. And so there's a different calculus if you're an American trading with an American in Brazil than if you're a Brazilian trading with a Brazilian in Brazil. And so you have to consider what's the citizenship of the person, of the company, right? What's the and companies are even more complicated, right? Because a company can have 200 subsidiaries in different locales, and they can all be licensed differently. So now the question becomes, what's the entity doing business at what frequency, with what counterparty, to what effect? And now, if you can parse your way through all the tax codes, right, there's a tax code that's different by state, by municipality, by country, by counterparty A and counterparty B, changing over time. If you can parse through all that, you can actually figure out the right financial strategy. If it sounds daunting, it is. And so you can imagine why a typical CFO or treasurer would say, screw it, we're just going to use the currency, the local currency, or we're going to use the dollar, right? Because that's the path of least resistance. And their thinking is all of this is too complicated for me. I sell pizzas, right? So the norm for a corporation is they focus upon the operating business, operating jets or planes or trains or automobiles or making food. And they don't really focus upon the treasury operations or the balance sheet because it would just make the business too complicated.
Okay, so I just want to come back to, because we've gone on a number of tangents there. What I want to kind of separate, just as a model in people's minds, as I was listening to you talk in the beginning, you were saying money is kind of the total economic energy of a system. So the kind of I'm kind of thinking almost of an electrical system. Like the money is the power in the system, and then the currency is, I mean, it's meant to represent the power in the system, and it's kind of like a map or an attempt that enables us to move that economic energy around the system. So it's almost like current flowing through a circuit, whereas the total economic energy is the money itself. I've heard
Yeah,
you
the
call
money
it like
money
a,
is the energy.
yeah.
The
I've heard
money
you
is
call
the
it
energy.
a ledger in the sky. I've heard you call it that in the past, which I
Well, there are
think
lots of
that's really good.
metaphors, but why don't we start with energy? So money is the energy in the system. So how do I store energy? Well, if I had $1 million, I could pump water uphill with the
Hmm.
$1 million. I could convert the $1 million into electricity, put it in a pump, and I can pump water uphill into a reservoir. And now all the water behind the dam represents potential energy. By the way, if I'm lucky, right, the force of nature just dropped the rainwater into the reservoir behind the dam, and I
Hmm.
don't have to pump it up. So now I've got $1 million worth of water. Now, why is the water energy? It wouldn't be energy at sea level. It's energy at altitude,
Hmm.
right? The higher you are, the more energy you have. If you're 1,000 feet up with 1 million pounds of water or 1 million gallons of water, 1,000 feet up, that's more energy than 100 feet up,
Hmm.
right? The effect, the energy is the difference between where the water is going to flow versus where it is. That's potential energy is going to be given off, and ultimately what you're doing is you're channeling gravitational energy,
Hmm.
right? The real energy came from gravity, and the water is the fluid. If I'm flying an airplane at 50,000 feet, I have more energy than at 5,000 feet, right? How do you know? I just point the nose down and the plane starts to accelerate, right? And I pick up velocity. So I'm converting potential energy into kinetic energy.
Hmm.
Okay, so if I wanted to move energy via another medium, I can move it through air pressure. Sound is acoustic energy.
Hmm.
Ah, that's more energy, right? If I yell, I'm putting more energy into the system, right? Less energy, more energy, right? Singing, right? What are we doing? We're listening to someone perform music. We're watching them do
Express
do
energy.
an extraordinary performance art on energy.
Hmm.
Look at a guitar, right? And think about Tesla said, you want to understand the universe, think in terms of vibration,
Hmm.
right? And frequency and energy. So a guitar has got a fretboard, and when you're playing the guitar, you're actually changing the frequency with which the strings vibrate. One hand is actually putting a bit of energy into the system, but the real trick is change the length of the strings so that the strings vibrate at different resonating frequencies, and then you get the chord, you get the music. So any you can use many mediums to move energy. When sound is moving through the air, right? The air is the currency.
Hmm. Hmm.
Is it a good currency or bad currency? Well, the sound moves through the water faster than through the air. Water is a better currency than air. But the sound moves through a piece of wood or solid faster than the water. And the stiffer the solid, the faster the sound moves
Hmm.
and the more efficiently it moves. So you can pick any kind of medium to move energy. Electricity is a way to move it. Sound is a way to move it. Water is a way to move energy. You have a certain amount of energy, in your body, and your blood, right, is the currency that's moving the energy through your body,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it works to a certain level. So fiat currencies are a method of moving energy. Um,
That's
all
what I wanted to get
all of
to.
these mediums have dissipation, like they dissipate energy, right? That's why well, if I shine a light through a vacuum, it will travel further than if I shine a light through a wet blanket.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Why? Same energy dissipated faster, right, through a solid than through the air. But you can figure out that we can see stars that are light years away, but you can't see candles that are 10 miles away
Mm-hmm.
because the air doesn't it dissipates energy faster. So all of these things dissipate energy at a certain rate. The U.S. dollar right now dissipating energy maybe at the rate of 15% a year, about. Um, but in Argentina or in Turkey, they're dissipating energy at the rate of 70% a year. And the best managed U.S. currency, the best managed at a given year, maybe it was dissipating energy at 7% a year. And right now in Japan, the Japanese currency has lost 19%. Well, let's say the US dollar strengthened 19% against the yen
Against it.
in the last 6 months. Okay, so if the US dollar is weakened 8.5% against consumer goods, and if it's weakened 20% against property, like single family homes, and if it's weakened 33% against oil, but it's strengthened 19% against the yen, you can see that the yen is losing 60%, 50 to 60% of its energy in 6 months against a commodity like oil. Now there are all sorts of individual effects. So oil is probably going up in price because the scarcity of oil has been increased because of the war. But if we took U.S. single family homes and said it looks like the inflation rate of the U.S. dollar against scarce desirable assets is about 20%, then you can see that the effective inflation rate of the Japanese yen against scarce desirable assets is 35%, maybe 40%. Becomes tricky to measure, but that's what happens. So the reason that I don't want to hold the currency forever is because it's bleeding off energy over time. But the reason that I want to hold it for a day is because there are massive network effects. Yeah. When I walk into a pizzeria, they don't price the pizza in Apple stock, and they don't price it in Bitcoin. They don't price it in ounces of gold. They price it in dollars. When I go to Europe, when the EU formed, one of the interesting things that happened is in the 10 years after the EU formed, most menus in the European Union started listing products in the local language and English. English became the second language on all menus of most nice restaurants all throughout Europe. And then, of course, they started listing prices in euros. Before that, they listed the menu in French and francs.
Mm-hmm.
So you had a standardization on a common currency and a standardization on a common language, and that facilitates the medium of the process of exchange in the near term. But the price you pay is the loss of your local culture, the loss of your local language, and the loss of control over your local currency, and the increase in the power of the centralized bureaucracy.
So, okay. So, moral of the story here is that we, in some way, by necessity, particularly how we've emerged as civilizations, we have territory to contend with, and the latest incarnation of contending with the territory is the nation state. And within the nation state, we've had to, in some way, create a medium for people to move monetary energy. But by virtue of the fact that the these nation states have become quite bureaucratic, there is an increased dissipation of energy in that process. And would you agree with the fact that we're coming to a point? I know your position on Bitcoin, and I mean you made it clear for the last half an hour in terms of it being property and its designation as property, making it difficult to be used as a currency. But kind of like what you said about the euro there, they moved over to the euro, they slapped English on all the menus. Can Bitcoin, in a sense, bootstrap its way in a similar sort of fashion where its menus have euros and Bitcoin on them in terms of a way for people to make payments? Because Bitcoin seems to be, again, let's assume that the nation state and this territorial necessity doesn't exist for a moment. Um, Bitcoin in cyberspace is not only a better money, but its money currency relationship um, doesn't have any leakage, I guess. And the pathway there is obviously messy, but
In in the extreme, what is the word? The extreme ideal model. If there was, you have to imagine. I don't know what you think about government. A worldwide benevolent government, uh, and the government decided to adopt Austrian economics and eliminated all the fiat currencies, and so we went to 100% Bitcoin everywhere in the world. No war. We'll leave that off for a second. And then you just went to a complete hard money standard. Then you would have the Austrian ideal, and you'd have a deflationary economy, and then the price of everything would get cheaper every year. It would get cheaper at the rate that the economy grew.
mm-hmm,
If we added 2% more productivity a year, then everything would get 2% cheaper a year. And so you just have to imagine that it's a there's a nation. Um, I haven't really thought through whether you can do it for one out of 100 nations, right? Because the other 99 nations would also have access to Bitcoin, but they'd have other currencies, and there'd be political dynamics and military and war dynamics that you have to work through. So I haven't quite worked that out. But it seems to me that if you have the support of the nation state to adopt a single currency, and that's Bitcoin, then you could make it work. I mean, it's not going to happen in the next 30 years. Not that I could see 100 years out, 200 years out, sometime in the distant future. You would have to rebuild. First of all, you have to answer the question, what do we do with all the countries?
mm-hmm,
And then after you figure out that, what do we do with all the currencies? And then how do we persuade everybody? And then after that, you have to rebuild the accounting systems and rebuild all the software systems. But in theory, right, there's that future. I just don't think it's practical anytime in the next few decades. If we take a more realistic situation, look at Argentina right now. You have the local peso, and then you have the dollar, and then you have Bitcoin, and then you also have the real. And so if you're Argentine, you can't. There's no company in Argentina that can reject the peso and still stay in business, right? So unless you've got an idea to peacefully change out the government, I don't know how that happens, right? It's just there's no one can operate there and stay in business, right? Um, so what you end up with is the same thing you're suggesting for Bitcoin replacing the dollar is the thing that the dollar needs to do to replace the Argentine peso, right?
mm-hmm,
The dollar is a much better currency in Argentina than the peso. So if you wanted to watch how hyper Bitcoinization happens, watch how dollarization happens. And does it happen with bloodshed or without bloodshed? Right? Like the El Salvador dollarized, but it was after a civil war.
mm,
Right? I mean, and so go look at all the different countries in the world, and ask the question, how do they change currencies and how do they adopt a stronger currency, right? And it's a slow process. And like the Argentine peso has been collapsing for 20 years. Well, actually, technically,
For a
if you
hundred
study
years.
history, yeah, I think in the House of Morgan, right? The guy that ran the bank before the first J.P. Morgan, he got into the business by bailing out busted Argentine bonds and the like. I mean, Argentina's had sovereign debt collapses since the late 1800s that
Hmm.
that we can measure every 20 years for the last 150 years, right? So like 1920s, there's another South American round of collapses. In the 1950s, I did another round. In 1970s, another round. 1990s, another round. And now we're in another round. So this has been going on for a while. Normally, what happens is the country's currency collapses. Look, the Russian currency collapsed in the late 90s. What'd they do? They installed the new ruble. The
Hmm.
Mexican currency collapsed. What'd they do? They installed the new Mexican peso. Right? What happens when you collapse the currency? Generally, the question is, does the government stay or go?
Yeah.
So if the government collapses so badly that you become a province of the United States, right? If you were Hawaiian and you actually ran your own Hawaiian empire and then your nation collapsed, then you might become a state in the United States and adopt the dollar. But generally, you have to have a political union to have a monetary union. So this is why if your goal is to make a lot of progress in the next decade, then the best way to think about that is Bitcoin is 100 times better than gold, which means Bitcoin's going to get 100 times bigger than it is right now. And we should spend our time explaining to people why Bitcoin is better than gold, better than owning an equity index fund, better than owning a second investment property, better than owning a bunch of heavy metals, right? Better than owning farmland. And you could do that, and Bitcoin could become a $250 trillion ecosystem without threatening anybody, right? There is no nation of gold. Gold doesn't have a police force, has no army. There's no NSA, CIA protecting gold, right? There's no one that's going to fight and die for gold. There's no president of gold. No one's getting elected to defend gold, right? So if what you want to do is improve the human condition as fast as you can with the least amount of confusion and friction and unintended consequences, then you simply attack the nation of gold and you swap out everyone that wants sound money in the form of gold for Bitcoin. And after you finish that, you swap out $100 trillion of real estate and property investments for Bitcoin. And after that, you swap out corporate bonds and equity, and you demonetize equity and you demonetize um, corporate bonds. And by the time you've done that, you probably will have changed the politics in 100 countries, and you'll probably have very favorable politicians. And Bitcoin probably will have built itself into the political apparatus of those countries. And either their currency will become Bitcoin-backed derivative, like they will back their currency to Bitcoin,
Hmm.
or they will adopt Bitcoin. And in any event, your currency gets stronger if you do intelligent things, and your currency gets weaker when you do irrational things. Right? So if you loved a country, you would want the leadership to do intelligent things. So what's intelligent? Um, Generate a lot of power, like nuclear power that's cheap and easy. Good road systems, good technology, efficient language, efficient currency, good legal systems.
Spend less than
Not too
you
much.
spend less than you make.
Yeah, all of these rational things, right? Adopt a Bitcoin standard. All of these would be rational things. It would strengthen the currency, and it would lessen the inflation rate of the currency. If I want to create massive inflation, I just do the opposite. I, declare war on 100 different things, and I spend 100x more than I take in, and I regulate everything and everyone everywhere, right? And that causes the currency to weaken, and in the extreme, completely collapses. So it seems reasonable that as Bitcoin grows and it gets better understood, rational nations will embrace Bitcoin holders and Bitcoin miners and Bitcoin companies. And as they embrace them, the politics will become more favorably disposed to Bitcoin. And as that happens, their companies will start to hold Bitcoin and their families, and then eventually their institutions, and then their agencies, right? And as that happens, their currency becomes a Bitcoin derivative. Do you know how like a stock is a derivative? Like MicroStrategy is a Bitcoin derivative.
Mm-hmm.
So is GBTC. So is BITO, right? So is a Bitcoin miner. They're all securities, but they're derivatives of Bitcoin. Are they better than Bitcoin? Well, not over the long run. Over the long run, Bitcoin is the best thing. Are they different? Yes. But are they better as Bitcoin derivatives than if they were gold derivatives? See, if MicroStrategy bought 500 million in gold instead of 500 million in Bitcoin, we'd be a gold derivative. And gold has been flat to down in the past 2 years. So you see, if a nation adopts the gold standard, its currency becomes a gold derivative. If it adopts a Bitcoin, it becomes a Bitcoin derivative. The more Bitcoin technology and Bitcoin asset value in the citizens and the corporations domiciled in the nation state, the stronger the nation is, the more rational it gets, the stronger its currency gets. So the problem, the stark problem is when the currency is inflating at 50% a year, like let's say Argentina, right? That's the obvious problem, a collapse of the currency, or in Turkey when the currency is collapsing. And when you have Bitcoin or the peso, that's an extreme proposition. And that sets up a confrontation, an unhealthy confrontation, right? Because now you're a citizen and you have to choose to support your nation state currency, or you have to choose the global currency against your nation state's wishes. Okay, that's hard. And so what do? Well, if you're smart, right, you have like 5% fiat currency, 95% Bitcoin, right? And you kind of take the hit on the 5%, that's your checking account, and the 95%, you kind of preserve your store of value. That's what you do it. But what if you had a fiat currency which was only inflating at 2% a year or 3% a year, right? I mean, the common narrative is that the dollar is only going to inflate at 2% a year. We know that's not true. The number is more like 7% in a good year. But when the number gets to be less than 7%, at 7%, then you've got 10 years to have your money cut in half. Okay, so you can rely on it reasonably for a year, 2, 3 years at a time below 7%. When it gets to 21%, you can rely on it for 24 to 36 months. And when it gets to 40%, right, you've got 1 year that you can rely on it. And when it gets to 80 to 90%, right, you've got weeks to months.
Mm-hmm.
So my point here really is there's easily $500 trillion worth of monetary energy divided between, probably a lot more than that, divided between bonds and equity and property and collectibles and real estate and currencies and Bitcoin. Bitcoin's only, right, it's not 1%, it's 10 basis points.
Yeah.
We're 1/10 of a percent of all of that right now. So, given a choice, you can either take the position that all nation state governments must topple and fail today. I'm an enemy of all nation states, so that Bitcoin is the sole currency. Or you can take the position that Bitcoin is simply going to be pari passu to gold and be 10 times bigger. Or Bitcoin is much better than gold, it'll be 100 times bigger. and you can partner with every nation state. If you use common sense, right? Like walk down the street and tell everybody you have a good idea and say, I've got a really good idea. It's going to be good for America, good for your family, good for your company, good for your city, good for your state, and good for you. And it's going to be fun. And think about how many people will want to embrace that idea. Oh, and it'll make you rich. That's one proposition. Bitcoin better than gold. The other proposition is I need you to abandon your company, quit your job, leave your city, go to war with your state, go to war with your country, tell your family they're all stupid in order to do the right thing. And if they all agree with you, then maybe we'll make progress. And that's the Bitcoin is the only currency. You see, so one of them is just so difficult as it's unnecessarily painful, and it doesn't get you anywhere.
Yeah,
Like
well,
you're
but
not going to get 100 people to buy into that crusade. 95 or 99 out of 100 will just disagree with you, and you'll like accomplish nothing. And if you flip it and say, I've just got a better technical idea and it's just a better asset than gold, you'll persuade lots of them, and you will build up support exponentially over time. And at some point, 30 years out, 40 years out, 50 years out, maybe there'll be a nation that has a currency which is inflating at 3% a year and Bitcoin. And then you'll have this interesting political discussion. Do we get rid of our fiat currency and just go to all Bitcoin? And if we do, it'll be a peaceful transition. But there's no way there's going to be any peaceful transition in Argentina to Bitcoin right now. That's not happening.
yeah. So reading between the lines, what you're advocating for is a process. I want to read a quote here, which is a quote from Sun Tzu, which actually, funny enough, came up today. It says, "To secure ourselves against defeat lies in our own hands, but the opportunity of defeating the enemy is provided by the enemy himself." And I guess it's an apt quote for what we're discussing here. Is that why why pick a fight with the big boss when there are steps along the way, and by the time you actually get there, that big boss may just be the what's the guy behind the curtain in the Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
I forgot the name.
Yeah. So, well, how about this metaphor? Maybe you're not fighting against a person. It's just the future fighting against the past. For
Mm,
example, uh, sound money in the 19th century was gold. Sound money in the 21st century is Bitcoin. Right? We're just here to evolve from the best idea we had in the past to the best idea we have in the future. Right? If if you're looking for someone to lose so that you can win, it becomes a zero sum game. But who's the loser if I teach you a mathematics, introduce electricity, and I give you an automobile? Right?
the horse and
Maybe your
carriage.
maybe your grandfather was afraid of automobiles and afraid of electricity and didn't get a chance to go learn calculus or higher level math. But your grandfather's not the enemy. It's like he did as good as he could do. We're just introducing technology. I think a much more constructive way to look at this is we're introducing a better technology. The world is not out to get you. Right? All those people that you think are out to get you, they think that they're trying to save you. They think they're doing the right thing.
Yeah,
Right? Everybody's the hero in their own story. So you have a disagreement with them about their strategy, but they don't think they're villains. And half the people in the world don't think they're villains either. In the best case, right? We could pick almost any issue, and the world divides 50-50 more often than not on most of those issues. So if you want to make progress, you'll be a lot more effective if you introduce a new, better way to achieve a good thing that everyone can benefit from. So, for example, instead of saying down with the bankers are the bad guys and we're the good guys, what if we just said, the bankers are trying to do their best to provide financial services, but they've had to do it with gold and with sovereign debt and with defective securities and monetized precious metals. And if they could do it with Bitcoin, they'd be much better at providing financial services. There are plenty of products that people might like to have. Let's take insurance, right? Would you like life insurance? Yeah. Are there life insurance companies? Sure they are. Are they the enemy? No. What's the problem? They're using sovereign debt in order to generate yield to pay off the life insurance policy. Okay, so what would you like them to do? Use Bitcoin. What would happen if they did? The life insurance policy would pay 10 times as much and cost 1/10 as much. Okay, are you going to say death or down with life insurance companies? No, like there's nothing, we probably need car insurance companies too. Corporations do things useful. Banks do things useful. We just got to, if we look at it that way, like it's important, it's important to be able to hold your own keys and take personal custody. And that point is made often in the Bitcoin community. But what about a 75-year-old in a coma in the hospital? Do they have to take personal custody of their keys? And what about your unborn child or your unborn grandchild and you want to give them Bitcoin? Do they have to take custody of their keys? Like is there a place for a bank or an institution, a custodian, to transfer your Bitcoin from you to your unborn child? Because right, this is that libertarian debate, which is everyone should be responsible for their own actions. Yeah, well, like 3-year-olds? How about 3 months old? Right, where do you draw the line? How about not born for 3 months? Are they responsible for their actions? Well, if they're not responsible for their actions, is it possible for a private company to do you a benefit? I think so. I think a private company can give you insurance. I think a private company can give you a loan. I think a private company can be a custodian for your unborn child. What if you, what if you get in a car wreck and you suffer brain damage? Okay, and you've been saving all your life to give money to your family. Well, what happens? You were stupid. You got in a car wreck. You deserve to lose it all, right? Not really. Not really, right? So it comes down to the question, is there a place for nonprofit organizations? Is there a place for institutions? Is there a place for companies? And is there a place for governmental agencies and for countries? And there probably is. There's a massive debate that'll go on forever about how big or small that role should be, right? Some people want very small government. Some people want lots of government. Some people don't like corporations, but ultimately, we'd all suffer and live a much lower standard of living if we didn't have companies. I mean, a simple example is electric power. I mean, you obviously want to have centralized generators of electricity because they will give you 1 day supply of electricity for a few pennies. Like the amount of electricity you can generate yourself, it would take you 8 hours to generate 2 cents worth of power. 8 hours. So it's pretty obvious you want a company, to create a generating facility, and you would rather, work for about 15 seconds for that electricity and then spend the rest of your day doing something else. And I think that once you embrace this idea that we need to allow for a continuum of adoption, right? An economy. There's a place for people to hold their own keys. There's a place for people to custody keys for a small period of time. Like I go into the hospital for heart surgery and I might not live, and so I custody my keys with someone for a week, a day. There's a place for that. There's a place for people. I just got diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Okay, well, I'm going to transfer my keys to someone for the rest of my life because I got an Alzheimer's diagnosis, right? So it's a different thing. You're a
Brain wallet
mayor of a
wrecked.
city. If if you run a school, right, a private school, and you've got Bitcoin in the treasury, maybe all the parents don't want the principal to walk around with the Bitcoin keys. They want it with some kind of institutional custodian for a lot of other reasons. Especially what happens when the principal quits and you hire a new principal. Let me tell you, I hire a lot of people in my life, and if you have any experience trusting people, I could interview you for 20 hours and think you're God's gift and the perfect person, and I'll still be right 75% of the time and wrong
Hmm.
25% of the time.
Hmm.
And so if you're wrong 25% of the time, right, then that's pretty devastating, to what if the country loses all of its assets 25% of the time, right? Like every 4 years instead of every 1 year, right? So you can't afford uh, human fallibility sometimes. Sometimes you need something to be 99.99999% reliable, like as Deming would say, or some manufacturing scientists. So I think if you're going to build a higher level civilization, you have to be open minded to a lot of different ways to work with the asset and different time frames. And when you go to the extreme, you undermine adoption, but you also undermine utility because the real economy is going to be, you need Bitcoin at layer one. You've got Lightning, a non-custodial open layer two, and then you've got layer threes like Cash App and PayPal, and the exchanges, and then you've got layer fours, securities like MicroStrategy or GBTC, where we've literally got the thing embedded in what we are, and then you've got products. You could build it into products and services. You could build a Bitcoin into a Tesla. What if I had a Tesla and I bought the Tesla and the Tesla basically was self-maintaining forever, right? Because I had enough Bitcoin in it to pay for all the electricity and also pay for the maintenance upkeep on the car. So all of these are different aspects of a digital economy, and they'll all be subject to different rules and different laws, and some things will fail and some will succeed. And if you just take an open mind and allow it all to evolve, I think people will start to see this as economically good for everybody, technically good for everyone, and morally, politically good as well. There don't have to be any losers here. Everybody can be a winner. And if you go into the marketplace and your position is Bitcoin fixes this, well, how about just Bitcoin improves this? What if you went to every company, every product, every family, every country, every politician, everybody, and just said, I'm here from Bitcoin and we can improve whatever you're doing. It doesn't even matter what you're doing. It'll be better if you build some type of Bitcoin into whatever you're doing. There are no enemies. The world just divides into people that don't understand how we can help them yet, people that do understand how we can help them, right? And then people we haven't talked to yet.